They figured I'd stay away. They thought regret would keep me grounded. For nearly an hour, I stared at the invitation on my walnut desk, its cream-colored paper catching the faint glow of my office lamp. Colonel Sarah Bennett. My name, inked in bold serif, felt like a dare. To them, I hadn't been Sarah in years, just a colonel, a title that had become a barrier between me and the family. The envelope's seal was unbroken, but I already knew what it held. Whispers had reached me through old friends and a forwarded email. Emily was getting married. And not just married, she was marrying Captain Ryan Mitchell, the man I'd pulled from a wrecked Humvee in Fallujah. The twist felt like a calculated wound. 7 years. That's how long it had been since my mother's voice last cut through the static to reach me, from Texas to whatever base I was stationed at. No call for my promotions, no word when a roadside bomb nearly took my leg during my last deployment. Just silence. And now this. A pristine card, its elegance masking the sting of obligation. At the bottom, in my mother's sharp handwriting, a single word, respect. The base in Fort Bragg was quieter than usual that evening. Outside, a warm breeze rattled the flagpole, its cables groaning softly. My quarters were stark, shaped by years of discipline, a metal cot, a row of pressed uniforms, a locked safe no one dared touch. I flipped the invitation over, half hoping it would dissolve. A firm knock broke the stillness, 2 quick taps. Sergeant Carter stepped in, his frame filling the doorway, his eyes catching the envelope before I could move it. Colonel, he said, his voice low. Heard about it. Carter had a way of knowing things, his instincts sharper than any briefing. He sat without asking, his presence steady like the Appalachian hills he came from. We didn't talk personal matters often, but he'd known me since I was a Green Major with too much nerve and too little trust. You going? He asked. I pushed the invitation across the desk. He picked it up, his thumb brushing the gold-embossed edge. Mitchell, he said, almost to himself. The guy you dragged out of that wreck, right? Same one, I said, my tone clipped. Steady. Carter leaned back, the chair creaking under him. You saved his life. Now he's marrying your sister. The silence between us wasn't strained. It was familiar, heavy with unspoken history. Should I go? I asked. Finally. He eyed me for a moment, his gaze sharp. Depends. You going to fight a battle or face a ghost? I let out a short laugh, the kind that recognizes a scar. Maybe just watch one fade. He didn't smile. Then go. But don't wear your rank like a shield. Wear it like a story. Let them see who you are without them. His words lingered after he left. I set the invitation down and crossed to the small window overlooking the training field. A fresh batch of recruits was running drills, their shouts sharp and eager in the dusk. For a moment, I envied their unscarred fire. A gust of wind shook the glass. Somewhere below, a drill sergeant barked an order, answered by a chorus of sir, yes, sir. The kind of raw conviction I'd long since tempered. I pulled my dress uniform from the closet, the one I hadn't worn since my father's funeral, where I'd stood silent in the back. I laid it across the cot, smoothing the sleeves like they could erase old wounds. That day came back clearer than I wanted. They'd buried him with full honors, army band, 21-gun salute. But no one saved me a seat. My mother sat between Emily and Aunt Clara, her face set in that cold, familiar line. Emily had glanced at me once, her expression blank, before turning away like I was just another uniform out of place. I'd stood through it all. Afterward, my mother had touched my arm and said, "You shouldn't have worn that. It looks like you're trying to overshadow us." Us. I'd said nothing, just walked away. I hadn't looked back since. Now, 7 years and 3 deployments later, I held a wedding invitation that felt less like reconciliation and more like a debt called due. Ryan Mitchell. It wasn't just the marriage that stung, it was that he, of all people, was binding himself to the sister who'd once called me a stain on the Bennett name in a letter I'd burned but never forgot. I thought of that night in Fallujah, the blast, the smoke, the twisted metal. Ryan's arm pinned under debris, his face pale with shock. I'd crawled through open ground to reach him, my hands slick with his blood and mine. I still carried the scar on my forearm. He'd whispered, "EIOU," before the medevac took him. And now he was marrying Emily. I opened my laptop. Flight schedules. Austin, Texas. 1 layover in Atlanta. I booked the red eye. Quiet, anonymous. I didn't tell base command or my driver. The confirmation pinged my inbox seconds later. I wasn't going to be welcomed. I was going to be seen. 4 years ago, I pulled Ryan Mitchell from a kill zone. In 10 days, he'll marry the woman who broke me. The irony tasted like dust. I could still hear it, the crackle of my radio, the sharp gasp before someone muttered, "That's live ordnance." Then my own voice, louder than I meant, cutting through, "Don't move." Ryan froze, his boot on a pressure plate, sand clinging to his sweat-soaked face. We locked eyes across 15 feet of death. In that moment, something passed between us. He knew he was done, and I wasn't letting that happen. I don't remember the pain of crawling, just the grit under my palms, the burn of smoke in my lungs. I disarmed it with shaking hands. When it clicked safe, Ryan exhaled, a sound I didn't report. Now I sat in seat 4B on a Delta flight from Raleigh to Austin, staring out at a Sky 2 calm for the story in my head. I'd paid extra for an empty seat beside me. The flight attendant nodded at my ribbons and offered me a coffee. I took it black. I asked for water. Somewhere over the Carolinas, I closed my eyes, not to sleep, I couldn't, but to shut out the gravity of what I was hurtling toward. Not a battlefield, not a firefight, but something sharper, more intimate. Family. The plane touched down 15 minutes early. Austin Bergstrom smelled of stale coffee and polished floors. My military ID cut through security like a blade through silk. I stepped into the arrivals hall, and my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it, tempted to let it ring out of defiance. But instinct won. "Hello," I said, my voice flat, untraceable. "Well, look who showed up." It was Emily. Her voice still had that honeyed edge, sweet enough to mask the steel beneath. She could make a greeting sound like a jab. "I didn't come to throw a parade," I said, already moving toward the escalator. "You didn't say anything for 7 years," as she replied, her tone too bright, like a spotlight meant to blind. "So, this is something." No apology, no pause, just her usual Polish. "I came because I was invited," I said, right. "Because Mom twisted your arm." I didn't respond. A beat passed, then she added, "Ryan's excited to see you. You two always had a spark." I froze mid-step on the moving walkway. "That's not funny." "I wasn't joking," she said, and I could hear the smirk, the same one she'd worn at high school fundraisers when she'd whisper to friends that I was a finding myself in the rock. That practiced charm hiding her sharpest edges. "That all?" I asked. Just don't show up in full dress blues. It's a wedding, not a briefing." I ended the call without a word. Outside, Austin was alive with late spring, live oaks and bluebonnets lining the roads. The drive to the venue wound through suburbs with manicured lawns and white picket fences, the kind of place that screamed perfection to anyone who didn't look too close. I avoided the highway, letting the rental car drift through streets I used to bike down when I was still Sarah. When a sprained ankle was the worst pain I knew. As I pulled into the hotel parking lot, I spotted Mrs. Delaney, the neighbor with the perfectly trimmed azaleas and a nose for everyone's business. She was fussing with a sprinkler, her eyes narrowing as she clocked my car. "Sarah Bennett," she called as I stepped out, slinging my duffel over one shoulder. "And Mrs. Delaney," I said, nodding. She tilted her head, taking in my posture, the faint outline of my service ribbons under my jacket. "Still in the army, then?" I thought after. "Well, you know, everything. You might have moved on." "Some of us don't move on," I said, and walked past her without waiting for a reply. The Bennett house hadn't changed, too pristine, too staged, like a set piece for someone else's life. Freshly painted shutters, a spotless driveway, no trace of wear. Only the porch light wavered, like it was nervous. I rang the bell. A pause, then footsteps. The door opened, and the scent hit me first, lavender cleaner, my mother's trademark. Every inch of that house was scrubbed to a sterile shine, as if it could erase any flaw. Margaret Bennett stood there in tailored khakis and a cream blouse, her hair pinned back with surgical precision. Her eyes flicked over my jacket, my boots, my silence. The air between us thickened. "Don't make this harder for Emily," as she said, her voice low, like she was issuing an order. They used to call my silence defiance. Now they called it compliance. The dining room was frozen in time, same crystal chandelier, same heirloom plates, same undercurrent of strain beneath the polished oak table. 16 chairs, 15 people, one unspoken war dressed up as a reunion. I lingered in the doorway, watching. Margaret glided between wine glasses and linen napkins like she was orchestrating a state dinner. Emily sat at the center, radiant in a soft blouse, laughing too brightly at a joke from our cousin Travis. He wasn't clever, but he had enough charm to fool most. I saw through it. I saw through everything. My seat was at the far end, tucked by the buffet table where the kitchen's heat grazed my shoulders and the conversation rarely landed. I pulled out the chair. It groaned. Emily raised her glass. "To family," she said, her voice carrying like a toast to a room full of strangers. "To new chapters," Margaret added, her glance sliding past me like I was a shadow. "To Captain Mitchell and the Brighterby," Uncle Paul chimed in. No nod to me, no Sarah's here, and no mention of Colonel Bennett flying in from Fort Bragg. Just a void where recognition should have been. I sipped my water. The wine hadn't made it to my end of the table. Maybe it never would. A retired general near Margaret, Thompson, I think, squinted at me, his brow creasing. "You look familiar," he said, half to himself. Margaret cut in, smooth as ever. "That's Sarah. She's been overseas, handling logistics." "Logistics," Emily echoed with a smile, like she was explaining a child's hobby. "She keeps things organized, I bet. Important things." A few laughs rippled across the table, none reaching me. I studied the silverware, a butter knife, a soup spoon, too blunt for damage but sharp enough for show. My silence wasn't surrender. It never had been. But in this house, with these people, silence was always a weapon they didn't know how to counter. Thompson tilted his head again. "Wait. Iraq, 2013. Ul Anbar?" I met his gaze. "Yes, sir." His jaw twitched like he wanted to say more, but Margaret's subtle headshake stopped him. He turned back to his plate. The silence grew, punctuated by clinking forks and forced coughs. No one asked me anything. No one paused to include me. I could have been a ghost, but even ghosts leave a trace. The server finally reached my side with the wine. I took the glass without a word. Emily turned to me, her eyes glinting with that performative warmth. So, Sarah, how long you staying? Or do you have to rush back to guard a warehouse or something? A smirk flickered down the table. I sipped the wine, let it settle, then set the glass down deliberately. The people I protect, I said, my voice calm but pointed, outranked this room. The silence that followed wasn't loud or angry, just heavy, like the air before a storm. The chandelier seemed to dim. No one laughed. For once, they didn't know where to put me, and that scared them. My name wasn't on the seating chart. It was printed on heavy ivory cardstock, displayed on a wooden easel in the venue's foyer. Table by table, name by name, I scanned the list. No Sarah, no Colonel Bennett, just absence in elegant calligraphy. I stood there too long, watching guests glide past, adjusting ties, pinning bourtonnées, murmuring about table placements. A woman in navy flats leaned around me, tapping the chart. Table 6, near the band, as she said to her date, delighted. I looked again. Table 14, far corner, by the service door. Of course. Margaret had mentioned it that morning, casual as she handed me a coffee I hadn't asked for. You'll be at table 14, out of the way, for everyone's comfort. Margaret hadn't waited for a reply. Now here I was, in dress blues, ribbons aligned with razor precision, standing like a sentinel in the venue's foyer, trying not to measure how carefully I'd been pushed to the edges. The banquet hall was stunning, I'll admit. White roses spilled over every table, their scent mingling with the hum of string quartet music from hidden speakers. A coordinator in a black headset adjusted centerpieces with the focus of a sniper. The chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow, every detail polished to perfection. But I wasn't part of the polish. Margaret glided toward me, her navy dress whispering against the floor, her smile as practiced as a diplomat's. You look sharp, she said, her eyes skimming my medals like they might leave a mark. Just keep it low-key. If anyone asks, say you're in operations. I held her gaze. I lead divisions. She tilted her head, just a fraction. And you're here as a guest. Before I could respond, a photographer darted past, his camera clicking like gunfire. He paused, gave me a quick once-over, then turned to snap Emily laughing with her bridesmaids. His lens didn't linger on me. A voice behind me muttered, "It's chilly in here, isn't it?" One of the ushers, fiddling with his tie, grinned. Or maybe it's just the bride's mom. I didn't answer. The ceremony was swift, almost clinical. Emily stood in white, radiant, untouchable. Ryan stood beside her, his uniform crisp, his face a mask. His eyes swept the crowd once and paused when they met mine. No nod, no flicker of recognition, just a glance, then away. No one mentioned the woman who'd pulled him from a burning wreck in Fallujah. That didn't fit the story they were telling. When the officiant called for family to join the blessing, I stood, more out of muscle memory than intent. Margaret's hand was there before I could step forward, her touch light but firm on my sleeve. "Let's keep this simple," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the organ's hum. "This is Emily's moment." I looked at her hand, then at the aisle where Emily and Ryan knelt, surrounded by a circle of relatives. I could have walked up. No one could have stopped me. But that wasn't the fight. The fight was their certainty that I didn't belong. I sat back down. The quartet played something soft and saccharine. Guests dabbed their eyes. Cameras flashed. At the reception, my table was wedged beside a service door, half hidden by a floral arrangement. The place card read S. Bennett, no rank, in tiny script. The napkin was slightly creased, unlike the pristine ones around me. Maybe an oversight, maybe a signal. A server poured wine for the table but skipped my glass. When I flagged him, he checked his tablet and said, sorry, you're listed as non-drinking." I didn't bother correcting him. Emily moved through the room like a flame, untouchable, drawing every eye. She posed for photos, spun in her dress, pressed kisses to cheeks with a warmth that felt like ownership. Ryan stayed close, one hand at her waist, the other holding a glass he barely sipped. He didn't look my way again. Then the toasts began. Margaret lifted her glass. "To love and to legacy," she said, her voice clear, commanding. "The heart of this family." The room murmured approval. Emily glowed. Ryan shifted, his jaw tight. I sipped the water I'd poured myself. It tasted flat, like the moment. Then Emily took the microphone, her smile sharp under the chandelier's light. "To think," she said, her voice lilting, "even my big sister showed up, all the way from some base somewhere." She paused, scanning the room until her eyes landed on my table. "Keeping the gates secure for us all." She grinned. "Let's hear it for our quiet guardian." The laughter wasn't kind. It was the kind that cuts, the kind I'd heard in school hallways, at family dinners, in whispers meant to sting. The kind that lingers like smoke. The room joined in, a few claps, some smirks. Margaret leaned in from her table, her voice slicing through the noise. "She's always been, or independent," as she said, "but at least she's punctual." The room tipped into laughter again, louder this time. I stood, not fast, not furious, but deliberate, like a gear locking into place. Ryan was already watching me, his face still, no trace of a smile. Emily's grin wavered, just for a heartbeat, then snapped back into place. "Oh, come on, Sarah," as she said into the mic, her laugh bright but brittle. "It's just a joke. You always took things so seriously." Ryan moved. Not hurried, not hesitant, but certain. The room stilled, forks paused, glasses hovered, conversations cut off mid-word. Photographers turned, lenses catching the shift. He crossed the floor, past tables of old officers, college friends, aunts in pearl necklaces. Each step was measured, deliberate. He stopped a foot from me and saluted, a crisp, textbook salute, the kind you give to someone who outranks you, not a sister, not a punchline. He said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "Colonel Sarah Bennett, my commanding officer." The room gasped, a collective intake that seemed to pull the air from the chandeliers. I didn't move. Emily faltered, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. The microphone slipped, hitting the floor with a dull thud. She took a step back, her eyes wide, and swayed before collapsing into a chair. Margaret shot to her feet, knocking over a glass. "Sarah," she began, but her voice broke, unraveling into the silence. I didn't blink. They didn't speak, not because they lacked words, but because every word would have admitted what they'd done. The room froze, as if a grenade had rolled into the center of the dance floor. The quartet's notes hung unfinished. Glasses sat untouched, their rims catching the light like blades. Guests stared, caught in a moment they couldn't blink away. I stood steady, my spine a steel rod. Ryan's salute had ended, his hand now at his side, but the air still crackled with what he'd done. Not a gesture, not a plea, a declaration. "Colonel Sarah Bennett." My name, spoken with weight for the first time in years, hung over the room like a flare. Margaret's hand fumbled for her glass, knocking a napkin to the floor. It fluttered down, unnoticed by her. Her eyes flicked to me, searching for an escape, a deflection, anything to pull the moment back into her control. There was none. Emily sat slumped in her chair, her face drained of colour, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. The woman who'd orchestrated this night, who'd commanded every smile and toast, now looked small, fragile, like her script had crumbled. No one moved. Then someone did. From a table near the dessert bar, a man in a charcoal suit rose slowly. General Whittaker, retired, his frame still carrying the sharpness of his years with the 82nd Airborne. I'd served under him as a captain, back when I was all grit and no polish. He raised his hand in a crisp salute, his eyes locked on mine. The room grew heavier. Another figure stood, Colonel Ellis, who'd taught tactics at Fort Leavenworth. Then a woman, maybe late 40s, her posture betraying a career in uniform, though I didn't know her name. Then a fourth, a younger officer in civilian clothes, his salute quieter but no less deliberate. 4 salutes, not staged, not loud, just a ripple of recognition cutting through the room's polished facade. Margaret found her voice, though it wavered. "This isn't the place," as she said, her tone thin, like a wire about to snap. But no one looked at her. Eyes were on me now, not because I demanded it, but because the room had shifted, molecule by molecule, and every line now pointed to me. I could feel their unease, their shame, as they replayed Emily's jab, their own laughter, in their heads. They were rewriting their stories, scrambling to distance themselves from the moment they'd mocked me. Ryan stepped back, giving me the floor without a word. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't speak. I just stood, and that was enough to make them flinch. Margaret called me by my middle name, something she hadn't done since I was a child. Anne, as she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. "Can we talk?" We sat in the hotel's lounge, a dimly lit corner reserved for hushed deals and private regrets. The velvet chairs and low lighting felt like a stage for confessions, but the coffee between us sat cold, untouched, its bitterness sharp in the air. She hadn't called me anything but a you or Emily's sister in years. Now she was reaching for a warmth she hadn't earned. I waited, silent. Margaret smoothed her skirt, her pearls gleaming faintly. Her composure was still there, but it was fraying. "You made quite the impression," as she said, her smile the kind she'd used at charity galas. "The meteor's already talking." "Not all of its kind." I said nothing. She tapped her nails against her cup, a faint clink. "We weren't ready for that, Sarah." No one was. "Emily, she's shaken." "She fainted," I said, my voice cool. Margaret looked away. "Emily's sensitive." "To the truth?" Her jaw tightened, just a fraction. "I didn't come to argue." "Then why are you here?" She shifted, her poise slipping. "I thought you might consider a statement." "To the press." "Just to clarify, we didn't fully grasp your role." I blinked. "You want me to issue a press release to ease your guilt?" Her eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed even. "Not a lie. Just context. We've always valued privacy, and now people are asking questions about the wedding, Emily's words, about us." She leaned forward, urgency creeping in. "You know how these things spiral. A few headlines, and it's a mess. Emily's work, our family's name, it could all be twisted." I let out a breath, sharp like a blade. "You want me to protect your image?" Margaret's face hardened. I was protecting the family. No, I said, my voice low but unyielding. You raised a daughter. Silence settled, heavy as dust in an empty house. She looked away, her blinks rapid, betraying her. I made choices, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not all of them were right. But I never stopped caring. You stopped calling. Her chin lifted, trying to reclaim control. You could have reached out. I tried. I did. I cut in. You didn't listen. You wanted a daughter who stayed quiet and small. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence wasn't defensive anymore. It was raw, exposed. Then she did something I hadn't seen since I was a girl. Her hand reached toward mine, hovering over the table, tentative, like touching me might unravel everything. I never meant to hurt you, she said. I let her hand hang there, unanswered. People like Emily didn't need to strike. They whispered, and the world did the rest. We met in a cafe off the hotel lobby, all sleek wood and overpriced larties. Morning light poured through tall windows, softening the edges of the world. A few guests typed on laptops or sipped coffee, oblivious to us. Emily arrived late, her sunglasses perched on her head despite the indoor glow, her ponytail too perfect for someone who'd fainted hours ago. She slid into the booth, her smile tight, practiced. Well, she said, exhaling. That was something. I stayed silent. She cleared her throat. Last night. I went too far. The gate guard bit. It was a joke. I didn't think it'd land like that. I leaned forward, my hands clasped. You never think. You plan. She blinked, her sunglasses slipping slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded document, its edges worn but the army seal still crisp. A timestamp from 6 years ago, redacted sender. I slid it across the table. This, I said, was sent to a Pentagon oversight office. Claimed I falsified my service record, exaggerated my actions in Fallujah. Said my silver star was unearned. Emily's smile stiffened. I've never seen that. Of course you have, I said, my voice even. You wrote it. That's ridiculous, as she scoffed. It's anonymous. Could have been anyone. I slid another page across, this one from a military forensic linguistics tool. 94% match to your writing. Sentence structure, word choice. And one tell, irregardless. No officer uses that. But you did, in every email, every note. She froze, her hands gripping the table's edge. I was upset, as she said finally, her voice small. You were always the golden child, Dad's favorite, the war hero. I was just, in your shadow. I wanted room to exist. So you tried to erase me. She looked away, her sunglasses now a shield. I didn't think it'd go that far. I just, wanted to breathe. You buried me to shine, I said, my voice steady but sharp. But you forgot I don't break. The rooftop bar was quiet, the kind of place built for secrets disguised as small talk. Austin's skyline glittered below, a mosaic of lights that felt too soft for the conversation. A few patrons lingered at the edges, their voices low. I stood by the railing, my jacket catching the evening breeze. Ryan was already there, a glass of bourbon in hand, his posture more soldier than groom. He didn't look at me right away, just stared out at the city, like he was carrying a weight heavier than his vows. Colonel, he said finally, his voice low. I owe you more than I said last night. I didn't move. You didn't have to salute. Yes, I did, he said, turning to face me. I owe you my life. Fallujah, that wreck, you crawled through hell to get me out. I never forgot. I met his gaze. And now you're married to her. He exhaled, his glass still untouched. Emily, she's not what you think. She's complicated. But what she did to you, that wasn't right. I said nothing, letting the silence ask the questions. He set his glass down, the clink sharp against the railing. I didn't know about the letter, he said. Not until last week, when she let it slip. I told her to make it right. She didn't. And you? I asked. He straightened, his eyes steady. I'm here now. Not as her husband. As your officer. The wind picked up, tugging at my collar. Below, the city pulsed, oblivious. I didn't owe him an answer. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Ryan looked like a man staring at the weight of his choices. I didn't think you'd show, he said, his voice low, eyes still fixed on the Austin skyline. You invited me, I replied, stepping closer to the railing. He nodded, slow, deliberate. Didn't mean you'd come. He looked worn, not in his face but in the way he held himself, less guarded, more exposed. The years had carved something out of him. You want to talk about Fallujah? I asked. He turned, his bourbon untouched, catching the city's glow. You saved my life. That's not news. It is to me. A silence settled, not tense but heavy, like the pores before a storm breaks. She doesn't know, does she? I asked. He shook his head. I never told Emily about the wreck, about what you did. She'd turn it into a story. Her husband, the brave survivor, her standing by him. She twists things. Your story deserved better. I didn't respond. He looked back at the city, his voice quieter now. I followed your career. Every promotion, every commendation. I saved the clipping when you made Colonel. No one knew. Why? Because I owed you, he said, his eyes meeting mine. And because you're the best soldier I've ever known. I took a slow breath, the air cool against my skin. Then why marry her? He was silent for a long moment, his knuckles tightening on the railing. Because she was simple. The Bennetts offered a life that felt predictable, clean. I was done with near death. I wanted steady. She's not steady. She's a chessboard. He let out a dry laugh. Yer. Learned that about a month into the engagement. I watched him, the man I'd pulled from twisted metal, his blood on my hands. You know she sent the tip, right? The one that stalled my promotion. He closed his eyes, jaw tight. I suspected. Didn't want to believe it. I do, I said, my voice steady. He gripped the railing harder, the wood creaking under his hands. I stood up last night, he said, because if I didn't, I'd be no better than them. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the soldier from Fallujah, not broken, but carrying a debt he'd never repay. Don't use my name to shield yours again, I said. He nodded, just once. I won't. They tried to define me in whispers. I chose to speak loud enough to shake the walls. Ostenbergstrom's terminal smelled of jet fuel and rushed breakfasts. The hum of rolling suitcases and gate announcements filled the air, a rhythm I'd always found comforting. Airports didn't care who you were. They checked your ID and moved on. I was early for my flight, dressed in civilian clothes, hair down, duffel slung over one shoulder. I wanted to slip through unnoticed. I should have known better. A flash caught my eye, then another. Voices followed, sharp, overlapping. Colonel Bennett, any comment on the wedding? Did you know the bride would call you out? Was the groom really under your command? I paused, just long enough to draw their attention. A loose circle formed, microphones, phones, a few reporters balancing curiosity with caution. A security guard stepped forward, but I waved him off. Not yet. I spotted a small lectern near a display of Texas flags and visitor guides. I walked to it, my steps measured. The crowd hesitated, unsure if I was about to speak or walk away. When I turned to face them, they fell silent, like a switch had been flipped. I know what you're after, I said, my voice calm, cutting through the terminal's noise. A soundbite, a scandal, something to sell papers or clicks. But here's the truth. I met their eyes, one by one. I'm not my family's failure. I'm their silence made flesh. The reporters blinked, pens hovering. No one typed yet. They were listening. I served my country while being erased from my own history, I continued. I wore my uniform while being told I tarnished the family name. I earned my rank through blood, not their approval. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, hell. I pulled a folded paper from my jacket, still crisp from the printer. As of this morning, I said, holding it up, I'm launching the Vela Network, a foundation for service members whose careers have been undermined by those closest to them. Family, partners, friends. Because the deepest scars don't always come from the battlefield. The cameras clicked, a steady pulse. This isn't about settling scores, I said. It's about being seen. If you've been silenced, betrayed, or disowned, we see you. You still serve. You still count. A reporter raised a hand, his voice cautious. Colonel, are you saying your family targeted your career? I gave a faint shrug. Draw your own lines. I've drawn mine. The murmurs grew, but the crowd didn't surge. There was a weight to the moment, a gravity they couldn't ignore. Then a young woman stepped forward from the edge of the group, her cadet uniform pristine, her posture rigid with nerves. She couldn't have been older than 20. She snapped a salute, sharp and unwavering. I returned it, our eyes meeting for a brief, wordless moment. The reporters parted as I walked away, my duffel steady on my shoulder. The terminal's noise swallowed me, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. They didn't need words. I turned toward the gate, my duffel steady on my shoulder. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single notification, bold and unmistakable, Pentagon. We need to discuss. They wanted me silent. They never expected I'd become policy. The Pentagon briefing room felt colder than I remembered, not in temperature but in its sterile precision. Grey carpet, mahogany paneling, the gleam of brass emblems on every wall. It was a place where power spoke in clipped sentences and guarded nods, where authority didn't need to shout. It was already etched into the room's bones. I stood behind a sleek podium, hands resting lightly on its edges, my breath even. The screen behind me glowed with a single line, Valor Defense Initiative. The room was packed, generals, policy advisors, civilian analysts, and at the far end of the front row, Admiral Hayes, his silver bars catching the light, his frown skeptical. The kind of man who called a woman's conviction hysteria, but a man's a resolve. I began. This initiative targets a hidden wound in our ranks. Service members betrayed by family, spouses, or internal networks suffer in silence. Careers stall. Reputations erode. The system looks away. We lose good people. Not to combat, but to personal sabotage. I clicked to the first slide, retention losses. Then the second, unreported complaints. The third, mental health crises linked to defamation. Our current response is patchwork. My proposal is a 3-pillar system: legal advocacy, mental health support, and career protection, triggered the moment a credible betrayal is reported. Murmurs stirred. A civilian liaison scribbled notes. The brass sat rigid, arms crossed. Hayes raised a hand. "With respect, Colonel Bennett," he said, his tone heavy with doubt. "This feels more like a personal crusade than a structural fix." I gave a small, precise smile. "All policy is personal, Admiral. Or it's just bureaucracy." The room went quiet. I let the silence settle, not as a weapon but as a force. I didn't rush to fill it. We have systems for combat injuries, for battlefield loss, I continued. But what about betrayal from those we're told to trust? When a parent leaks your service record, when a sibling falsifies a report, when a spouse trades your honor for their gain. These aren't personal dramas, they're threats to readiness. A major in the back typed rapidly on her tablet. A policy analyst leaned forward, nodding. Hayes stayed silent, his frown deepening. I ended with one line: "We train our people to survive war. It's time we protect them from home." The room didn't cheer. Power doesn't applaud, it calculates. But the Deputy Undersecretary leaned forward, hands clasped. "We'll back it," he said, his voice steady. That was enough. That was everything. They used to call me the Bennett family's shame. I shed the label but kept the scars. The front yard was alive with colour, tulips lining the path, azaleas blooming like they had something to prove. The house looked smaller than I remembered, less daunting. Margaret's lawn was still her masterpiece, a testament to control, but the edges were frayed, a blade or two out of place. I stood at the curb, watching the blinds twitch in the living room. She'd seen me. The door opened, and Margaret stood there, no pearls, no makeup, just a faded sweater and a blouse with mismatched buttons. Her hair was thinner, pulled into a loose knot that didn't quite hold. She tried to smile. I didn't. "Come in," she said, her voice softer, worn by time or guilt. The house smelled of lavender cleaner, but beneath it was a stillness, like it had given up hiding secrets. We didn't go far, just the front room, 2 armchairs, no coffee, no pretense. Margaret sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I stayed standing until I was sure I wanted to stay. "I didn't know how to keep you safe without pushing you away," she said, her voice low. "You were so bold in a world that doesn't forgive bold women." "I wasn't bold," I said. "I was seen. There's a difference." She looked down, her fingers twisting together, betraying the calm she tried to project. "I thought if we stepped back, the rumors would fade. You could start over somewhere else." "You didn't step back," I said. "You wrote me out." A long silence stretched between us, heavy as a storm cloud. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Emily appeared, halfway down, in a loose sweatshirt, barefoot, her hair messy. Her eyes met mine, guarded but not empty. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Margaret glanced at her, then back at me. She hasn't been herself since the wedding. She never had to be, I said. She got to exist. I had to fight. Margaret swallowed, her throat tight. Is there anything I can do now? Yes, I said. Don't rewrite my story when I'm gone. If someone asks why I don't come back, don't say I drifted away. If they ask what happened, don't call it complicated. Say you chose. And so did I. She reached out, her hand trembling, aiming for mine or maybe for a memory of who we used to be. I stepped back. Emily's grip tightened on the banister, her knuckles pale. I turned to the door. My boots didn't echo on the hardwood like they once did. Time erases some things and sharpens others. I left without a hug, but I didn't slam the door. That was my choice. Reputation is what they whisper when you leave. Legacy is what endures when they fall silent. The community centre smelled of stale coffee and resolve, its folding chairs mismatched, some wobbling under the weight of their occupants. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a raw, honest glow. No ranks here, no titles, just people, bruised but unbroken. I stood at the front, sleeves rolled up just enough to show I wasn't here as Colonel Bennett, but not so far that I forgot who I'd become. The Valor Network banner sagged slightly, its edges curling against the wall, but its message stood firm: we don't erase the wounded. We arm them. About 40 people filled the room, some in fatigues, others in jeans. A man in the back wore a name tag that read simply a T. I cleared my throat. You are not what they called you, I said. Not weak, not unstable, not too much. You're survivors, and we don't silence survivors anymore. We teach them to lead. A ripple of nods spread through the room. A young man, maybe 18, raised his hand, his voice steady but soft. My brother was discharged last year. His CO said he was unfit after he reported a hazing incident. They buried his complaint, slapped a psych evil on his record. He's got proof, emails, texts, but no one will touch it. His words hung in the air, heavy but not alone. I stepped closer, away from the podium. We'll take it, I said. The Valor Network exists for cases like his. We'll get him a lawyer, a counselor, and a chance to clear his name. The young man's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Another hand went up, then another. Stories spilled out, betrayals by commanding officers, spouses, even parents. Each one a wound, each one a fight. I listened, not as a colonel but as someone who'd walked their path. The room didn't need my rank. It needed my scars. Bring them to us, I said, my voice steady, meeting the young man's gaze. We'll handle it from here. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, as if he'd been holding it for months. A woman in the back was filming on her phone, the faint glow of her screen flickering in the dim room. I didn't stop her. This wasn't about hiding, it was about being seen. A man in his 60s stood, his posture still carrying the echo of a career in uniform, though his flannel shirt and quiet eyes said civilian now. My daughter served under a CO who called her fragile when she reported misconduct, he said. Your speech at the Pentagon, it was the first time she felt like someone might listen. I nodded, just once, no flourish. Tell her she's not wrong. We're listening now. The room hummed with something raw, not cheers, not excitement, but a shared recognition, like a wound finally named. A phone pinged, then another. Someone held up their screen, a clip of my Pentagon briefing was spreading, 30,000 views, then 80,000, then headlines. Colonel Sarah Bennett. Still serving, no salute required. I glanced at the screen, then back at the room. Let them see. Let them know who I've always been. The National Defense Forum's auditorium buzzed with a quiet intensity. Rows of chairs held a mix of uniforms, suits, and weathered faces, veterans, lawmakers, survivors, analysts. Cameras hovered, waiting for something real. The stage was spare, a podium, a glass of water, a single American flag. I carried no notes. Margaret was there, I'd been told, seated near the front, alone. No Emily. I stepped to the microphone, and the room fell silent, not out of protocol, but out of respect for someone who'd walked through fire and made it look like mist. I was told family is everything. I began, my voice clear, unhurried. As if loyalty to blood excuses betrayal. As if love should hurt less when it comes from home. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Families are supposed to protect, to stand with you. But sometimes they demand your silence. Sometimes the deepest cuts come from the ones who share your name, your table, your past. The air tightened. I knew Margaret was listening, her practiced composure cracking. Betrayal doesn't always shout, I said. It's quiet, polite. It hides in toasts at weddings, in empty chairs at funerals. It dresses up as care but asks you to vanish. I paused, letting the words settle. I vanished for years, not because I was ashamed, but because I was punished for existing too loudly, for refusing to be the story they needed. A few nods, a soft gasp. I could feel Margaret's tears, silent as always. I looked out at the faces, young soldiers, older veterans, civilians carrying their own scars. They hadn't come for policy. They'd come for permission to be heard. That ends now, I said. I'm working with Congress to pass the Valor Defense Act, a law that protects service members from sabotage within their own circles. Because family, when weaponized, is as dangerous as any enemy. I stepped back, the room exhaling as one. It didn't clap, it breathed, releasing years of unspoken pain. As I left the stage, a reporter intercepted me by the exit. Would you ever go back to them? She asked, her pen poised. I didn't hesitate. I never left myself, I said. That was enough. The shutters of the coastal cottage rattled softly, letting in the scent of salt and driftwood. Late afternoon light spilled across the hardwood floor, warming the small room on the Oregon coast. The Pacific churned below, its rhythm steady against the cliffs. I'd spent the morning sketching, nothing grand, just pencil lines on paper, capturing the horizon's curve where it met the sea. The sketchpad rested by the window, the ocean's edge half-drawn, waiting. I didn't hurry. There were no briefings here, no orders, just the quiet pulse of waves and a notebook filling with thoughts I hadn't known I'd buried. A knock came just after 5. It was Ellie, the girl from the nearby village, maybe 12, carrying a basket of bread, apples, and a local paper I hadn't requested. Her grin was all freckles and questions. Thanks, I said, taking the basket. No prob, as she said, rocking on her heels. Miss Sarah, were you really a colonel? I smiled, just a little. Once. Now I'm just someone who fought for herself. She nodded, satisfied, and darted off, her sneakers crunching on the gravel path. Inside, my phone hummed from its place in a drawer, next to old dog tags and a commendation I never hung. A voicemail from General Carter, his voice steady but warm. Sarah, the White House wants you for the National Ethics Council. You'd lead it, if you're up for it. Think it over. I listened once, then deleted it. Freedom comes when you realize your story belongs to you alone. I sat at the desk, my notebook open to its final page. The pen hovered, then pressed to paper. I walked alone, but never lost. The ink dried in the fading light. I closed the notebook, tucked it away with the rest of what I didn't need to carry anymore, and stepped onto the porch. The air wrapped around me, soft and familiar. The wind lifted my hair, tugging it toward the setting sun. Below, the ocean stretched wide, endless, unapologetic. No headlines, no salutes, just the sound of a woman who'd once been erased learning to stand in her own light. Not for them, but for herself. After years of being silenced, she didn't need a stage to be heard. Her truth spoke louder than their whispers. The family that disowned her now flinched at her name, not from guilt, but from its weight. Justice didn't come through anger, but through presence, steady, unyielding, and hard-won. Like the final note of a song that lingers long after the music stops.